we start with brief feedback usually. Start with the Prime Minister. Talk about how it's beneficial for education and how you make students in developing countries on par with other students from other countries, because there will now be a common language. I think number one is, I think you need to do more to establish that English is a global language. So instead of just saying, oh, on par with other students and stuff like that, be more descriptive about it, right? So in terms of talking about how most of the universities are in the English language, body of work is also in the English language. So when you are able to familiarize yourself with reading, with understanding science and math in the English language, then you are able to access like the wider body of works that are in the English language versus just being able to interpret things that are within your language, which is limited, right? So the thing you want to make here is like, how much are you able to access the wider body of knowledge, right? Like English versus your own language, whatever language, right? So, and in order for you to do that, you need to establish how global it is first. And so the only thing that I would say you need to work on with this speech is, I think more about what are the processes in which your arguments require, right? How does it become beneficial for education? How does it become on par with other students? Right? What do you need to prove beforehand? Right? Like why when you say on par with other students, what do you mean? Right? What are the students on? What is their level? Right? What do they have access to that students who are learning in the national language will not have? Right? So these are things you need to explain beforehand before you make that point. Okay? So yeah, there's that. I also think in general, your speech was a bit here and there, right? It's kind of unstructured, right? Sure, there were some taglines here and there, but the general flow of it, you were jumping from one idea to another. There was not really a clear flow of the idea. So that's something you want to work on. Let's move on to Kingsley in LO. I think the largest argument coming from you about how people will have a poor understanding of English and the effects of it is actually quite a good argument. I think there are some issues here and there. I think you had mentioned that part of your analysis for this argument is that majority of developing countries have quite poor English, right? And at this stage, you were happy to just use that as the premise. I think here there needs to be. I think here what you can do instead of just leaving it as an assertion, you're just pretty much asserting developing country poor English. I think there is space for you to explain why that is the case, right? So things like poverty, things like they may not be an Anglophone country, things like they may have had colonizers which are not the English, right? So these are all reasons why a lot of developing countries will not have good English, right? Their English may be even worse than what we have in Malaysia, right? So material like that would go quite far to show how much you know about the world. Instead of just saying, developing countries, English poor. Yeah, my other points, right? Establish that first. I think then you go into your example of Malaysia and stuff like that. Poor understanding means people will be less successful. I think you were happy to just stop at people being less successful. But I think again there's space for you to explain what less successful means. Like what, in terms of academics, in terms of their careers, in terms of like being able to help with the economy of the country in the future, or like what does less successful mean? I think here you can probably like split it into maybe 3 different ways of success and why there are effects on those 3 different kinds of success that you can talk about, right? So do that, and that will help with the impact there. The last part about how it saves money, how it leads to jobs because you can teach without knowing English. It's a bit confusing for me. because it then leads back to money saving from not having to buy books in English. And so this whole thing was a bit neither here nor there. I think work on that, polish it, have a good idea, then work on that, workshop it. So there's that. Zara, DPM. Okay, you talk about how English is the predominant language in universities. You talk about how if you are not familiar with English, then you will get behind schedule, you will not know what is being taught, you then fall behind. I think there is some semblance of process here as well, how you get left behind. But I think the opposite needs to be there as well, right? Because what you have done is you prove the negative. If you don't know English, what happens, right? But I think the converse needs to be there as well. Like with English, if you know, like how does being taught science and math in English works in helping you keep up with university that is predominantly English, right? Things like you're learning similar language, you're learning the similar, you're learning similar terms, you're learning similar ways of explanation, and these will then help you carry forward in your first year of university and stuff like that. So the process, the converse process needs to be there. That's how you make the comparison, you see? So there's that. The next point that you make is that it's hard to translate to other languages, which then causes confusion. And you just kind of saw confusion, right? But what does confusion lead to? What are the effects of confusion? Granted, I know confusion is the effect, but what's the effect of that effect, right? And there are so many ways you can talk about the harms of people being confused, right? So think about that. Okay. We should Okay, so first you talk about how if you do it in your mother tongue, you are able to understand, therefore you prevent a waste of time instead of having to translate. So I think there is some kind of process here, which is good. But I think in order for this to work, like, how meaningful is the time taken for you to translate? Right, like how much difference does it cause? What was the difference? Like, is it meaningful? Is it a meaningful difference? Like, maybe that's what you want to explain. Next, you talk about brain drain. Basically, because it's a global language, you will go to foreign university and that causes brain drain, which is a bad thing. I think not a very strategic burden to take, because this debate just requires you to defend teaching in the national language. I'm not sure why you want to suddenly defend people not going to foreign universities. So there's a strategic mistake, I think, right? I think using the same premises, right, which is that about foreign universities and whatnot, I think what you can say instead is that even if you are taught science and math in the national language, because of all the things you previously said, you are able to understand the concept a lot better, right? And so once you understand the concept, even if you do go to a foreign university that teaches in English, it's quite easy to transition to that language because you've already understood the concepts. Versus a world where, sure, you are taught science and math in English and in English, but it's not your first language, you have a very limited understanding of it. Most you know terms and what they mean. But because you have a poor understanding of the concept, you have a significantly harder time to even when you go to university, because you don't really understand the concept. So basically the point you make here is that the understanding of the concept is probably more important than the familiarity with the words itself. Does that make sense? No. Yeah. Okay, so there's that. I think it's an odd win for this.